My name is Shelley Williams, although I grew up as Shelley Wilcox. And my hometown is Fountain Valley in Orange County. That's where I grew up. And I currently live in Manhattan Beach. My journey to yoga began when I was in my mid-20s. I was working as a professional modern dancer, doing some commercial work and dancing with some companies. I was also waiting tables and doing a little bit of acting and just really trying to figure out where my life was going. And professional dance can be very taxing on the body. And so I was finding myself hurting a lot. I was in pain a lot. And also just rushing around the city quite a bit from one audition to the next, one rehearsal to the next. And my roommate at the time, he said to me one day, why don't you come with me to yoga? And my initial response was, I don't have time for yoga. I have to train. I have things I have to accomplish. And he looked at me with a very knowing smile and was like, no, you need to come with me to a yoga class. And so I went with him, and in the first 5 minutes of class, we were in a very long forward fold, and it was really interesting, the inner dialogue that sprouted up immediately, like, this isn't safe. This teacher doesn't know what he's doing. I'm in this forward fold for way too long. My hamstrings are about to blow out, like one thought after another, and I don't know if I can make it through this class. This is incredibly hard. And that was pretty much the inner dialogue for most of the class. And then when we finally came to the final pose, and the teacher said, okay, now we're going to come into our final pose. Please lie down on your back. I found myself waiting for him to ask us to do yet another impossible posture and disconnect from how it looks on the outside, which was completely foreign to me. Like, there was no mirrors in the room. As a dancer, I was always very accustomed to, how does it look from the outside? How does it look from this angle? And no matter how it feels in your body, make it look a certain way, which is a beautiful aesthetic in dance. But I was laying there in Shavasana, and he continued to encourage us to release and to let go and to just be. And I had this amazing sort of like awakening, if you will, of, wow, this is part of this practice, is this absolute surrender. And it really kind of hit me then that the message that he had been delivering through the whole class was to really disconnect from that external circumstance and connect internally. And it didn't hit me really till Shavasana. And it was so profound. I left from that first class and just felt so different and so deeply affected and very much at ease. And it was this flavor that I realized I had been seeking for a long time through all of my different physical practices. And I kept coming back to it again and again after that. And that was the first step in for me. How do I soften the competitor within? That's a good question. I've always felt most at ease in my body and also in my mind and when I'm in movement, when I'm embodied. And so I was always very attracted to any kind of movement, gymnastics and dance and surfing and hiking. And I realized at a young age that I really didn't enjoy the competitive aspect as much as I enjoyed the performative aspect. And that was one of the reasons I left the commercial dance world and started working with companies, is because, and also in gymnastics, really only competed a few times and shifted into dance. I didn't find it satisfying to try to work towards a medal or a number on a scoreboard, but really what was satisfying for me was the experience of moving and being connected to the movement. And I started to find that through dance. But as I mentioned before, the performative aspect of it is a whole nother beast. And so when I started practicing yoga, it felt like this coming home, what an amazing practice, what a beautiful practice where it's physical, it's a practice of embodiment, but there's this spiritual aspect to it. And it really felt like a coming home. And I was really grateful to my parents. They were wonderful Catholics. They are Catholics, and that was something that they shared with me and my brothers and sisters growing up. But I felt a bit of a disconnect when I was inside the temple of the Catholic Church, you know, being seated in a pew and kind of talking and hearing. And that's not where I felt that connection to the divine. It was when I was out in nature and in my body and moving. And so as I started to learn about the different aspects, the different limbs of the practice of yoga, that was very attractive to me, is that not only is it a physical practice, but it's also, if you're open to it, it can be a very spiritual practice. It can be a study of anything from movement anthropology to the study of the mind and how our mind and how we react or interact with the world and with people around us, a study of the self, essentially. My journey into teaching was at the suggestion of others, quite honestly. I was teaching dance technique, and from that, and from some injuries that I had sustained and going into physical therapy and really getting interested in the healing process from some knee surgeries, the therapist I was working with suggested, why don't you get into personal training? You're really interested in how the muscles and bones work, and I think it'd be a good fit for you and a good profession. So I got into personal training in my early 20s and felt that there was more to working with the body than just how do we strengthen our quadriceps and our biceps. And then I was introduced to Pilates technique through some of my dancer friends. And that was another layer of, this is kind of marrying the technique and the quality of movement that we study in dance to the functionality of the body. And so some friends of mine encouraged me, why don't you start studying Pilates and maybe even teach? You have an understanding of how the body moves and certain techniques with attentiveness to being present and to quality of movement. And then from there, I partnered with a good friend of mine, and we had a studio in Hermosa Beach that was called the Pilates Room Yoga Lounge. And I'd been studying yoga for a long time. At that point, I guess, I won't say a long time, but several years anyway, that I had been studying yoga, but it was kind of my thing that was my little secret that I chose not to teach, because I didn't want to, when I was taking classes and practicing, be in that teacher mindset of how do I communicate this to someone else. I just wanted it to be this secret little thing that was for me. And one of my teachers at the time that I was studying with, Max Strom, suggested that I attend the teacher training. They were offering the first teacher training at Sacred Movement. And it was a collection of really wonderful sage teachers, Max Strom, Saul David Ray, Shiva Ray, and Sherry Borman. And so I attended that training because he suggested it. And he says, I think you'll really enjoy it and it'll deepen your practice. And I was completely blown away, of course, studying with these four teachers and Shiva, and with her background and just the absolute brilliance that she brings to sharing the practice of yoga, and Saul with his bhavana, his deeply rooted just energy and softness. And Max has this whole philosophy about him and simplicity that is so unlike anyone else. And so I felt really fortunate to be studying with them. And when I finished the training, Max said, okay, now I'd like you to teach here. So Max encouraged me to take a class on at Sacred Movement, and I was completely terrified. I had been teaching movement for quite some time, but for me, teaching yoga is so much more than teaching movement. The movement part is the easy part. Your foot goes here, your arms go here, but really what I found challenging And what I now find inspiring is how to teach the yoga. How do you teach yoga inside of good alignment and well sequenced, intelligent vinyasa practice? How do you teach the yoga? And that's a question I continue to ask myself and continue to ask the students and the student teachers that I work with. So I took on a class there, and I, would feel sick to my stomach before showing up to teach. But it was good that he encouraged me, and I had the support of the amazing community at Sacred Movement at the time, and the teachers there to study with. And it was a really special time for me to be in that community and in that tribe. And it really continues to inform my teaching today. I continue to study with Shiva as often as I can. I continue to study with Max whenever he comes into town. And it's a bottomless well that I like to dive into as often as I can. I think some sincere qualities of a yoga teacher are humility, for sure. We are students as well. Kindness, loving kindness, acceptance, compassion, enthusiasm. Becoming a parent, and even giving birth and becoming a mother was probably the most profound yoga class that I'll ever take, and it's the longest yoga class. And they definitely inform each other. For me, part of my personal practice, and that word it's kind of funny. I remember listening to an interview with Shiva Ray, and she says, I don't want this to be a yoga practice. I want to be yoga. I want to embody and live yoga. And I think of that often, that may we not be limited by the 2x6 dimensions of our mat and our yoga clothes and the yoga studio. May that just be part of the recipe of our whole life, so that our whole life can be an experience of yoga. And so becoming a mother, I'm so grateful for it. My children are the blessings of my life. And it's given me that daily reminder to not take myself too seriously, to stop and smell whether it be a rose or a weed that is a dandelion, to really just enjoy the present moment. And children have no concept of time. All they have is the present moment and the joy of the present moment. And that has been such a great reminder for me in walking through each day and even through the yoga practice, is that we can get very ambitious in our lives. We can get ambitious with what we want to accomplish in a day. We can get ambitious in what we want to accomplish on our mat, what we want our students to accomplish, and just that reeling back of let the agenda go and enjoy what is happening, however it looks. What's the feel of it? What's the taste of it? What's happening on your mat? What's happening in this moment with your child who just crapped her pants and it's exploding out onto your shirt, and the parking meter's up? You know what I mean? Let's not take this too seriously. Let's find a moment for humor and slow down a little bit. And as far as how yoga plays a role in my life as a mother and as a householder and somebody that needs to, pay rent and put food on the table, it's definitely been my rock. It's something that I really need to have in my life on a daily basis for me to feel balanced and for me to be the best mama I can be. And I've also allowed my yoga experience to move a lot beyond, again, the 2x6 dimensions of my mat. People ask me, a lot of my students ask me, so do you practice every day? And what's your practice look like every day? And it doesn't it doesn't always look like what we see on these videos. Sometimes it does. Sometimes my yoga practice is on the mat and it's focused and I'm working with asana. Sometimes my yoga practice is out surfing in the water, on the beach, running and rolling around in the sand. The common thread is that there's movement, there's connection to my breath, there's connection to where my mind is and becoming present. And if that takes the shape of surfing or being on my mat or bike riding with my children, then that's my yoga for the day. The most important question, as a yogini, how do I know my practices are working? I believe I read this article or this quote in a local yoga publication a few years ago. I can't remember who wrote it, so I apologize that I can't remember the author of this, but it said something to the effect of, you know your yoga practice is working for you if your relationships are improving. There's many times where, look, I can get my foot behind my head now, or I can hold a handstand, or I'm finally in a full Hanumanasana. But if your relationships are not improving, then that's really for me is the feedback is, am I able to communicate a little bit better? Am I able to catch that first kind of pattern of response and change it a little bit for the positive, And sometimes that means just taking an extra breath and giving an instant or a situation a little bit of time to breathe. A friend of mine, this family that I see in Costa Rica quite often, the father, the patriarch of the family, his name is Mario, and his saying is, El tiempo es oro, time is gold. And I think about that a lot as far as like, take some time, take a breath, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Check your reaction a little bit and can you shift it from negative reactive or neuroses to like a thoughtful one. And that's a little bit more of the living yoga to me. That's how I know that I'm connected with my practice, if I'm able to take that time, that golden time.